All righty. So again, welcome to this fourth in a series of webinars leading up to the PIEVC Global Forum. This is a PIEVC Practitioners Network webinar. My name is Eric Sparling. I'm with the Climate Risk Institute and hosting on behalf of my colleagues Dan Sandink from the Institute for Catastrophic Loss Reduction and Katherine Lotsen and Ben Hodek from GIZ. Together with the Ontario First Nations Technical Committee, we make up the PIEVC Alliance. I just want to extend a special welcome to those of you joining us today from outside of Canada. I just want to recognize that I'm situated today in Ottawa, and that this is unceded, unsurrendered territory of the Anishinaabe Algonquin Nation, whose presence here reaches back to time immemorial. I'd like to welcome you. If you desire, please feel free to introduce yourself in the chat function and feel free to include where you are coming to us from geographically, and that you can add your own land acknowledgement there as well if you like. So I'm joined by Claire Sanders today, also of the Climate Risk Institute. She is today's Zoom host. So if you run into any issues, audio, etc., you can reach out to Claire directly, please, through the chat. You can also send messages to Claire if you have questions about the webinar series itself or anything else. You can also send messages to the host and panelists. That's another option within the chat function. So we're using Zoom polls today throughout the session, and you can interact with those directly on your screen. They'll appear directly on your screen. That will be coming up shortly. Just want to make mention that we are recording the webinar today, and we'll send a link out to everyone who has registered. So you'll have that recording going forward. And I see, yeah, some people are introducing themselves in the chat. Please continue that. I think, Claire, can we start with the poll questions at this point? So the first one, if you can just give indication of where you're joining us from.
Okay, it's sticking up. We're almost there. We've got about 55 people watching right now. Hopefully that will increase. All right, I'm gonna end the poll and share the results. Can you see it, Eric? So we've got almost everybody here from Canada and a couple from Europe.
Yeah, that's what I'm seeing.
Okay.
98% from Canada, a few joining us from Europe. All right.
Okay, and then
so next poll question. What sector best represents you?
Okay. Gonna end the poll and share the results.
All right. Yeah, so just to verbalize it, pushing half of the participants almost are on the consulting side. The next biggest portion municipal, kind of even split federal and provincial, and a few on the university or academic side. All right. Claire, if you can give us the next question, please.
What is your sector of focus? Okay, I'm going to end that one. Share the results.
All right, so about pushing 40% on the general adaptation planning side. Stormwater and buildings kind of equal on 8 people for each of those specific sectors, and then transportation and electrical distribution or transmission mixed in as well.
And some
Right.
people who do all of the above, which is impressive.
Sorry.
Yeah, all of the above. There is a number of folks
Oh,
doing all of the
somehow I'm
above.
not seeing it.
So if
Okay.
you scroll down, yeah. All right.
I'll get it. Thanks.
All right. Next one. Have you used the PIEVC protocol before? All right, it's almost leveled off. Okay, I'm going to end the poll and share the results.
All right, pretty much an equal split between yes and no. So kind of nice to see, great to see new folks, yeah, having interest in this. So yeah, 30% various times, and 30% knowing nothing about PIEVC yet. So welcome to the newcomers. All right.
And the last one.
Do we have a final one, Claire?
Yeah. Just want to know if anybody who's seen other webinars in this series before. And we will be putting, I'll put, after I close the polls, I'll put the link to the webpage where you can view previous webinars as well. Okay, I think that's about it. Oh, okay, I'm gonna end the poll.
All right, slide 2, please.
Okay, so most have seen, I've been to a previous webinar, it's great.
All right. I think I already mentioned this is the 4th in a series of 8 webinars focused on the use of the PIEVC protocol for factoring climate change impacts into plans for and the design, operation, and maintenance of infrastructure and buildings. There are recordings of the past webinars as well. And Claire, the best place to find those is in the Practitioners Network?
In the Practitioners Network or on our website?
Or on the CRI website. All
Yeah.
right. All right. So you can see the balance of the schedule and the webinars to date on the screen, and the balance coming up as well. And it's all in run up to the PIEVC Global Forum, which we'll be talking about in a minute. If you can move to slide 3, please. And I guess actually I jumped the gun just to say, yeah, that again, the recordings can be found on the website. All right, so slide 4, is that what we're on, Claire?
Yep.
All right, so at the last webinar, we launched our online networking site called the PIEVC Practitioners Network. If you haven't joined, you can do this through the link that Claire's putting in the chat now. Membership to the network is free. It's really meant to be an interactive online community that helps to engender exchange to advance knowledge and action in the area of climate change adaptation and vulnerability and risk assessment for infrastructure. So we're hoping as many of you can join as possible. It's meant to serve as a location where all manner of folks, researchers, experts, policymakers, practitioners can all come together to ask questions, generate ideas, share knowledge, and communicate with others who are working in the field. So again, we encourage your participation, and in signing up, you're able to provide a profile so others can get a sense of who you are a bit, your expertise, and could reach out to engage on questions around infrastructure vulnerability assessment and the PIEVC protocol and related questions in particular. So slide 5, please. I may mention, and we're really officially, pleased to officially be announcing today the upcoming Global Forum, which will be held at the Sheraton Wall Center in Vancouver, British Columbia on April 18th, 19th, and 20th this next year. There are 2 days of keynote addresses, panels, breakout groups, working sessions, and then a 3rd day dedicated to site visits around the city of Vancouver. Many of the themes and conversations from the webinar series that we're just kind of having a bit of a taster of here will carry forward into the global forum. But we're also looking for input on what you as members of the network would like to see and hear about and participate in, or even maybe have a role in leading at the global forum. So if you want to have input or make suggestions for sessions or speakers, again, please join the practitioners network. And we're going to be soliciting ideas of that sort there. The actual registration for the forum is opening in January, but please have it on your calendars. Again, that it's April 18th, 19th, and 20th. We hope you'll save the date and help us create a great event and experience there. We are also, maybe just quick mention that we're also actively looking for partners. So if you're interested in becoming a sponsor of the event, please let us know about that too. Next slide, please, Claire. So moving now on to today's webinar. Focus today is on climate services for vulnerability and risk assessments for infrastructure. We're super pleased and grateful to have 2 presentations this week. Each of the presentations is going to be shared by 2 different presenters. The first presentation is from 2 members of the Nile Basin Initiative, Modathir and Sami, who will be providing an overview of the NBI's climate services and the creation of a new climate services knowledge hub there. And that presentation will be complemented by one from Katie and Norm on the key challenges and opportunities for PIEVC climate data in Canada, and progress in designing a digital tool that will eventually support steps in one and 2 of the PIEVC screening and data, the PIEVC process, which basically involves considerable interaction between the climate service providers and the engineering side of things. So the way we're going to do this is at the end of both of these presentations, we'll take some time for quick Q&A, but mainly just for clarification on any points in the presentation. We'll have time for a longer Q&A session once both presentations are wrapped up. The way we're going to do it too in terms of questions is we'll be soliciting if you can put your questions in the chat function as we go along, and we'll be collecting those over time and then posing those to the presenters at the appropriate time. All right. So now I'd like to, I'll make the introductions of the speakers first, the first set, and then when we're beginning the second presentation, I'll introduce with the bios of Katie and Norm. So to begin with, Dr. Modathir Abdullah Hassan Zaroug is a climate water resources modeler at the Nile Basin Initiative Secretariat. He has several years of experience in climate modeling, atmospheric science, climate change adaptation, climate risk assessment, climate research, water resources management, and hydrology. And beside his experience in hydrological modeling analysis, he is also familiar with the regional climate models, calibration, validation, post-processing, and analysis. Dr. Zaroug has experience on the impacts of land use change on the regional climate and has advanced proficiency in communicating scientific findings in peer-reviewed journals and at professional meetings. Sami Osman is of the Nile Equatorial Lakes Subsidiary Action Program, a regional water resources engineer with 13 years experience in integrated water resources management and development. He received his bachelor's degree in civil engineering at the University of Khartoum in Sudan, and his master's degree in hydroinformatics from IHE Delft Institute for Water Education in the Netherlands. He obtained technical experience in the fields of integrated water resources management and development, water diplomacy and climate risk assessment, water resources modeling and decision support systems. Sami also has experience in project identification, preparation, implementation, including supervision of feasibility studies, design, and implementation of multi-purpose water development. So with that, I would like to turn it over to our first two speakers.
Okay, thank you very much, Zaroug, for the introduction. Ladies and gentlemen, PIEVC Practitioners Network, a very good morning, afternoon, and evening to all of you, depending on where you are, of course. Again, my name is Sami Osman. I'm the NELSAP water resource engineer. As Zaroug mentioned, I'm originally from Sudan, but I'm residing in Kigali in Rwanda. Also joining me in this presentation, my colleague, Dr. Modathir Zaroug. So you can introduce yourself, Dr. Modathir.
Yes, thank you very much. I'm happy and glad to be in this excellent forum. And I'm also happy to have this opportunity also to present. My name is Modathir Zaroug. I'm a regional water resources modeler at NILESAP. I'm based at Entebbe in Uganda. Thank you very much. Back to you, Sami.
Thank you, Dr. Modathir. It's my pleasure and honor to welcome you all to this webinar session. As Zaroug mentioned, this is the fourth webinar session. It's a very important webinar series which has been organized by the PIEVC Alliance, including the Climate Risk Institute, CRI, the Institute of Catastrophic Loss Reduction, ICLR, the Ontario First Nations Technical Service Corporation, and of course, GIZ. So today, we will present to you the climate change interventions and the evolution of the climate services of infrastructure investments at the Nile Basin Initiative. But before I start the presentation, I would like to thank and acknowledge the help and support of the German Federal Ministry of Economics Affairs, Climate Action, for funding the CSI project under NBI, the International Climate Initiative, the Climate Risk Institute, CRI, for also their contributed to the NBI Climate Service Hub, and of course, last but not least, GIZ, our partner GIZ. Now we can go to the next slide. So for the presentation, I'm going to talk about who we are first, what is NBI. Then I'm going to talk about NELIP, which is the Nile Equatorial Lakes investment program, and the demand for climate proofing. Then my colleague, Dr. Modathir, will take us through the process of how NBI are becoming a climate service provider to increase the effectiveness of climate proofing. Next slide, please. Okay, the Nile Basin Initiative, NBI, is an intergovernmental partnership of 10 Nile Basin countries, which are Burundi, DR Congo, Egypt, Ethiopia, Kenya, Rwanda, South Sudan, Sudan, Tanzania, and Uganda. It's a prime institution involved in facilitating cross-border water management and cooperation. NBI was established in 1999, February 1999, and is guided by the shared vision objectives, which is to achieve a sustainable socioeconomic development through the equitable utilization of and benefit from the common Nile Basin water resources. NBI's, you can press next for them. Yes, NBI's core functions are facilitating basin cooperation, water resources management, and also water resources development. Click next, please. NBI has 6 strategic goals of its 10-year strategy of 2017-2027, which are the water security, energy security, and food security, which represent the nexus. Then we have the environmental sustainability, the climate change adaptation, and the last goal is strengthening the transboundary water governance. Click. We have 3 main offices. The headquarters is NILESAP, based in Entebbe, Uganda. And then we have Intro for the Eastern Nile, based in Addis Ababa in Ethiopia. And we have also the third one is NELSAP, is for the Nile Equatorial Lakes region, based in Kigali, Rwanda, where I reside. Next slide, please. Okay, now we'll focus a little bit on NELSAP. I'm from NELSAP. So NELSAP CU is the Nile Equatorial Lakes Subsidiary Action Program Coordination Unit. It's headquartered, as I mentioned, in Kigali, Rwanda, and is one of the two investment programs of the Nile Basin Initiative. The other one is being Intro, which is the Eastern Nile Technical Regional Office, based in Addis in Ethiopia. So NELSAP CU, with its mandate, facilitates jointly agreed transformative in-country projects with regional impact or significance and transboundary cooperative investment projects related to the common use of the Nile Basin water resources. It also builds regional capacity of countries and provides a platform for implementation coordination of transboundary investment projects. So in a nutshell, NELSAP is responsible for project identification, project preparation, resource mobilization, and in some cases, also project implementation. Like the Rusumo, we have the Rusumo Falls hydroelectric project. NELSAP is implementing this hydroelectric project in behalf of the three countries, and Tanzania, Rwanda, and Burundi. Where NILESEC, where Dr. Modathir comes from, is responsible mainly for the sector plans, policies, and regulations. So NELSAP, since it's the investment arm of NBI, it needs a support structure in order to successfully climate-proof these prioritized investment projects. One of the recent programs NELSAP conducted was the NELIP. NELIP is the multi-sector investment program. It brings together all Nile Basin member countries around a common regional goal, leading to a tangible outputs of direct benefits for the people of the Nile Basin. NELIP consists of 17 prioritized projects. It was screened through 128 identified projects for the whole Nile Basin countries, the 10 Nile Basin countries, covering water, energy, food nexus, like multipurpose projects, irrigation projects, fisheries, water management, hydropower, and transmission lines. As you can see on the side here, these are the 11 or the 17 hydropower NELIP investment projects. All these projects, especially the highlighted yellow highlighted multi-purpose projects, need to and will be climate proofed by using the newly established NBI Climate Service. Next slide, please. Okay, we in NBI, we realize that due to the changing climate, of course, in the very near future, in order for investment projects to be accepted, approved, and financed by the development partners and financing agencies, such as GIZ, World Bank, and African Development Bank, and others, the typical bankable documents like feasibility studies, detailed design tender documents, Asia, environmental social impact assessment studies, resettlement action program plans studies will not be enough due to climate change. A standalone or an independent climate risk assessment study for these infrastructure projects should be conducted and will be conducted. Therefore, NBI has significantly improved its capacity on providing climate services to advance the preparation of bankable climate resilient infrastructure projects, as often required by many donors. Thereby, NBI sets the standards of mainstreaming climate consideration into the project development cycle, and thereby aligns with its relevant policy framework. NBI has developed the NBI climate change strategy as part of the whole Nile Basin strategy for the period 2017-2027, with its objective to support stakeholders to improve resilience to climate change impact in the region. This is all to state the commitment of NBI to invest in climate-proofed structures and to become a climate service provider. Next slide, please. Okay, here I want to tell you about the journey or the process of MBI becoming a climate service provider. In order to establish the climate service CSI support structure, this is what MBI needed to conduct. So we started in 2018. The CSI project started in 2018 with the help and the support of the German Meteorological Service and also Engineers Canada, and of course, GIZ. We started developing the climate service baseline assessment in the Nile Basin. I can click. Then we piloted 2 investment projects to be climate proofed through PIEVC Protocol, which are the Borenga Dam. Then in 2022, we finalized the MBI climate proofing manual or guideline. Click please. Then we developed a user manual for the PMP, the probable maximum precipitation, and therefore the probable maximum flood. From there, the MBI Climate Service Hub, like you can say, gained its shape. We then introduced an e-learning course for climate proofing. And now we are, you can say, 90% finalizing or done on the development of the MBI Climate Service Hub. More details will be shown in the next slides. Next, please. So as I mentioned, we started the CSI project in 2018. So we kickstarted the project by developing the climate service baseline assessment in the Nile Basin. We then established a communication channels, some communication channels for the CSI work program. And then we engaged the Nile Basin countries through the hydromets, the hydrometeorological agencies and the ministries of water and dam operators, dam designers, water resources engineers for all the Nile Basin countries. And then we conducted capacity development on climate services and risk assessment. Next, please. In 2019 up to 2021, we conducted a climate risk assessment for 2 investment projects. One in the Eastern Nile region, specifically in the Tams Dam in Ethiopia. And the second one was in the Nile region, the Nile Equatorial Lakes region, specifically the Borenga Dam in Tanzania. We applied the PIEVC protocol on these 2 multipurpose projects, but mainly focused on the structural components of these dams. So when we observed and realized that this activity, applying PIEVC for multipurpose projects, it requires a lot of experts, time and effort to be conducted, and that it took, to be honest, way too longer than expected, NBI with GIZ and the development partners decided to find a way to effectively apply climate risk assessment in infrastructure investment projects. We then used the climate service manual and guideline, and Dr. Modathir will talk about it a little bit, and the climate service hub to conduct the climate risk assessment for the NELSAP multipurpose projects, not only for the structural components, but also for the serviceability of the projects, the multipurpose projects, such as hydropower, irrigation, municipal and industrial, flood control, and low flow services like navigation, fisheries, and ecosystem. So in this context, NILESEC established itself as a climate service provider for the MBI, and NELSAP and ENTRO were the climate service and PIEVC users or applicants, along with the Nile Basin countries, of course. So here is just here in the left corner, you see in the infrastructure components, this is when we conducted the climate risk assessment. And then we conducted it in the serviceability for all the other multipurpose projects. Next, please. Yeah, here are some pictures of the Nile Basin water specialists, dam designers and operators, and climate change experts from all the Nile Basin, conducting climate risk assessment for the NELSAP prioritized multipurpose projects. Now I'm going to give the floor to my colleague, Dr. Modathir, to continue this presentation. And we'll receive questions maybe after Modathir finishes. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you very much, Sami, for this nice introduction. Yes, here actually in this specific workshop, it was very important to transfer also the knowledge to the expert here at the Nile Basin Initiative countries. And the important thing is we take them through the whole process from like understanding this state of art, climate proofing process, and also like how to prepare the data and how to calculate the risk of this climate in our large infrastructure, how to calculate like the probability, the severity, and these like kind of things for the structural part in our infrastructures, and on the same times for the services also for these selected and specific dams. So yeah, it was very successful, those extensive training. Also, there were like good support from GIZ for this training workshop for our stakeholders. Next. Next, please. Yes. So this is one of the previous slide, maybe. Yes, thank you. So this is one of the important things we managed to develop. We have our integrated knowledge portal. In that integrated knowledge portal, and for MBI, we are Knowledge Institute, and we provide also information and guidance to our 10 Nile Basin countries. So here we develop this climate services knowledge hub, and it has these 4 important components. It has the climate services that we provide for our stakeholders. It also has like a digitized climate proofing guideline. So it goes through the whole process at different stages on how to climate proof your large infrastructure. It also has an e-learning component. It has several modules related to the climate risk, to the concept of the climate risk, on how to climate proof, on how to calculate the risk itself. And also there is an important component here about user community. And that component here, we link it now to the PIEVC, this practitioners network. It was introduced at the beginning. So we linked our climate services knowledge hub to this important PIEVC practitioners network. Next. Yes, so this is just briefly to show like the climate proofing manual in an interactive way. And during these different phases from planning, from project identification, and also project preparation and resource mobilization, the construction, and also operation and maintenance, on how to climate proof your large infrastructure at these different stages. So we digitize and we make it available also for our stakeholder to access this important information in our IKP. Next. Yes, so this is just briefly here how MBI now become like a climate service provider also for the 10 Nile Basin countries. And these are different kind of knowledge and information we provide to our countries and to our stakeholders, to the decision makers. There are information related to observation and monitoring, to capacity development, and also like climate information data, and also climate and hydrological and modeling projections. And here we provide like kind of bias corrected RCMs. This is regional climate models. They were bias corrected. and also GCMs, bias corrected and downscale, with more information related to IDF curves and other kind of information. So for our stakeholder, they can directly access and get this information and download them from our IKP, from our integrated knowledge portal, and to make all this information available for our stakeholders. Next. Yes, this is also one of the important things we did also, different kind of analysis related to the PMP, to the PMF, and also to the flood frequency analysis. So as I mentioned, if you now click in our IKP, you will find this information related to this, like IDF, as I mentioned, to this bias corrected data set in each cell of the Nile Basin. And also there are like PDF documents also for those who are interested to go in details also about how to climate proof our infrastructures. Next. Yes, this is also one of the important things we provide also for our stakeholders, the e-learning course or an e-learning component, and it has details on how to climate proof these large infrastructures for investments, as Sami mentioned. And it has like 4 modules with 14 units and 25 sessions in different topic areas related to the climate risk and the methods also associated to them. Next. Yes. So these are like some key areas for our climate services for our stakeholders. Thank you very much, and back to you. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much to both presenters. At this point, we'd like to just follow up with any questions of kind of a clarifying nature related to this presentation. If there are any questions of a clarifying nature, but kind of deeper questions for discussion, we'd like to carry over into the period after the second presentation. Claire and Katrina, anything yet? I haven't seen.
Yeah, there's one question in the chat there that they could address, and that's have they seen any changes yet in infrastructure planning based on your climate information?
Yes, thank you very much. Maybe I can start, and then my colleague Sami will complement. Yes, actually now we managed to mainstream our climate proofing in our projects at MBI. So for all the consultants now who would like to do any kind of pre-visibility or visibility study, we direct them to our climate proofing document. They have to go through our climate proofing documents, and also they have to go through some of the documents that we developed under this project. So this is one of the key things they have to do in any large infrastructure now. Sami, please add.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Lazy, for the question. Yes, as Dr. Modathir mentioned, yes, we have seen changes in the infrastructure planning. I'll give you an example. One of the projects that I'm coordinating right now is called the Angololo project. It's a dam shared between Uganda and Kenya. During the feasibility, now the detailed design is finalized, but during the feasibility study, the consultant who's conducting the feasibility study, put the height of the dam was only like 30 meters. But when we saw in the feasibility said that he did not, to be honest, the hub was not yet ready. But when he finalized the feasibility study, the hub was ready, the climate service hub was ready. And we instructed him to use the hub and to use the guideline to climate proof this dam multiple project. So between the feasibility and the detailed design, they increased the freeboard of the dam itself to 2 extra meters than the original design that they did in the feasibility study. And that was mainly due to the climate change projection that was developed by NELSAP and through the hub. That increased, of course, the freeboard of the dam itself, the height of the dam, and therefore, to be honest, also increased the budget of the. But it's better to invest now than to invest in rehabilitation in the next 10 or 15 years. So yes, that's a good example of how the hub and the climate service hub changed the design of the ongoing design of one of the investment projects. Thank you.
Thank you both very much for those responses. And I bet we'll get into some more discussion on opportunities for kind of further advancing mainstreaming of the climate services into projects, and kind of some of the experience coming to us from your respective jurisdictions, but also Canada, perhaps after the second talk here. So with that, I'd like to quickly introduce our second set of presenters. So Dr. Norman Shippee is a senior climatologist and the Stantec technical lead for climate vulnerability and adaptation. Norm has over 12 years of experience in the climate field and brings extensive facilitation, research, teaching, and leadership skills to the work he does on physical climate change and infrastructure. His work focuses on generating tangible climate projections for real-world application within climate risk assessments, developing climate change indices to advance the understanding of climate infrastructure interactions, and helping clients build resilience to future climate change. Want to also mention that Norm serves as technical advisor for the continued development of the PIEVC Infrastructure Engineering Vulnerability Committee Protocol and associated products, and has, for example, contributed to the high-level screening guide, part of the new family of PIEVC resources. Katherine Pingree-Shipee, Dr. Katherine Pingree-Shipee is a climate scientist with the Climate Risk Resiliency and Sustainability team at Stantec Consulting as well. And Katherine conducts climate change assessments, often using the PIEVC protocol and other methodologies that conform to the international ISO standards to inform communities and governments on potential risk and vulnerabilities in the built environment and the overall community. She also helps determine adaptation and mitigation strategies for the identified climate risks and vulnerabilities. And Katie earned her PhD at the University of Victoria, and her experience in the climate field includes research, climate analytics and projections, risk assessments, and workshop delivery. With that, over to the two of you, please.
Thanks, Eric, and hi, everyone, and thank you all for attending today. This is a great opportunity to speak with you today and the committee. So today we'll talk a little bit about some of the key challenges and opportunities we see within PIEVC, particularly focusing on how climate data in Canada has evolved over time and what we see as some opportunities with some PIEVC suite of products that we've begun to develop around, as Eric was mentioning, online versions of kind of steps 1 and 2, the data gathering portion of the assessment. You can go to the next slide. And I think there's there's no animation. Good. So some motivation, and many folks who are in Canada will understand many of the events that we've seen over the last few years. We've come a long way in terms of climate risk and climate risk assessments within Canada and North America, but we still are being impacted by major extreme events, and we will continue to be impacted by major extreme events into the future. So our motivation here has to remain the same, where we're trying to ensure that both our built infrastructure now and our infrastructure that we are continuing to build into the future will look more resilient to climate change. You can go to the next slide. So we use this example of how British Columbia is focused on making sure that building code is thought about for future climate and not just current climate. Many of us know that building code has been developed using historical climate change information or climate information, no climate change information for a long time, and that the codes and standards still do not necessarily incorporate future climate change. We see a demand quite often for projected future climate change conditions around the core design parameters, like heating and cooling demands, flooding, extreme precipitation, and so on. And so this example here kind of shows that if we were to continue to design to today's historical codes, as climate changes and it changes over time, we're exposing ourselves to potentially unmitigated risk that we would otherwise have updated into the future. And as climate is changing at a rapid pace, we're unable to kind of keep up with codes and standards in such a way without looking out into the future. Go to the next slide. One of the biggest challenges here with using climate data that we actually see now is not so much that there isn't data available, but it's more that there's these large databases of climate change information that are available for users to pick off the shelf. These go from temperature and precipitation projections for all different sorts of data sets. But these databases don't always have the exact information that's needed by engineers. We've made some large improvements there with the portals that we see within Canada, but this doesn't exist globally. And it still is a challenge to understand exactly which data set should I be choosing, which are the best databases to look at, are there good or bad databases overall. So the example here is that potentially there may be a situation where you're really looking at a threshold around temperature for how a road might be impacted by heat, or how siding might be impacted by heat, or that the proverbial frying an egg on the sidewalk idea in certain amounts of heat. That may be the threshold that you're concerned with, and the tailored data sets that we have do not necessarily have that information readily available. Go to the next slide. Many of the audience here from Canada, you know that within Canada, we have quite a few different data sources that are available, and they range in their level of expertise that is required to kind of navigate around. ClimateData.ca and the Canadian Climate Atlas are excellent websites for kind of being able to dive into that first level of climate data and be able to understand some of the tailored indices that are out there and the data sets that are available. Whereas things like the PIEVC Climate Explorer will let you dive a little bit deeper, even into individual models. Now, the wonderful thing here in Canada is that all of these sources use the same underlying data set. And we've made large strides to having high resolution downscale data sets across Canada at 10 by 10 kilometer approximately resolution. And PIEVC has produced all of those data sets. So this is a huge change from where we were probably 5 years ago in terms of available climate data. You can go to the next slide. We also have some really great initiatives going on within Canada around standards and codes, where we have SEC and NRC producing reports like the Climate Resilient Buildings and Core Public Infrastructure, CRB, CPI initiative, and the resultant report that you can see a screenshot up here on the screen. When we talked about design information and building code information, while not directly yet in the code, there are ways of helping to understand what those adjustments might look like under different climate change scenarios into the future. This report was a huge movement towards being able to understand some of that information. And from a climate scientist perspective, being able to apply data in a different way that we haven't been able to before. It allows for the ability to incorporate climate change into every type of project that you might see. The other piece is Infrastructure Canada's Climate Lens, which was one of the first kind of pieces that we had with all of the kind of mainstreaming of climate change analysis. So Climate Lens forced essentially a climate resiliency and a climate GHG assessment for any new infrastructure or any infrastructure over a certain funding mechanism. And at that point, we've started to see this becoming mainstream within our work. You can go to the next slide. I also wanted to highlight, and perhaps not everyone's aware of these newer developments around some of the other types of portals that are out there. The report on the climate resilient buildings and core public infrastructure has been out for approximately 2 years, year and a half. But now there is actually a design value explorer that's available through PIEVC. And this will allow you to spatially view essentially any of the core parameters that are within that data set and explore all the different potential scenarios based on essentially degrees of warming. So where the degrees of warming, when we hit a critical threshold, what do we expect the location that you choose the parameter to represent? I highlight this because this is a huge step forward in the way that we approach future design, but also how we approach retrofits of current buildings or any other core infrastructure. You can go to the next slide. So as I noted before, kind of the biggest challenge here is really that there's more and more data available, and that really there's a wealth of places to go and get that data. At some point, the climate specialist has to just make a decision as to where am I going to pull my data from. This is a totally different problem than we had 5 years ago when we said, where is the data that we can pull from, or what are the historical information that we can find. This has actually helped to streamline this whole process, but the challenge becomes big data sets, and the availability of the data is really there for everyone to use. But there's still a need essentially for climate specialists or climate informed persons to be able to go and access that data. In general, the process within PIEVC really integrates the information that you get from these portals all the way down to producing likelihoods and probabilities and hopefully having a happy client at the end of the day. You can go to the next slide. Now, the portals that we have available don't always cover every single parameter that we need. We still have quite a few issues with extremes. So some of that motivation that we saw on the first slide, the extremes that are being caused there, we sometimes are able to model pieces of them, but we still have less understanding from the climate models of parameters like ice storms or wind projections or wind extreme projections. These areas are still a big gap for us. And so there's still less certainty in climate change projections, and there's still issues around availability of data. So one of the bigger challenges that we see, particularly within PIEVC and data availability, is how do we apply future projections to some of the core extremes that we're most interested in. If we really had to screen out the main hazards that we need, a lot of times we hear wind extremes is the big issue, and we don't wind up with great projections around wind extremes. We can go to the next slide. A couple of other challenges here, and those who have walked through PIEVC before would probably recognize what these tables look like. If you haven't before, these are likelihood tables from the PIEVC protocol. On the right-hand side, this is kind of from the high-level screening guide, the way that has been recommended essentially for doing a quick high-level screening. The left side is more of a table that you might see in a typical assessment. And there are a couple of challenges that we see here around the types of parameters that we see, and I'll use absolute versus kind of a relative approach. Depending on the type of assessment you want to do, depending on the level of detail that you want to go to, you have to make decisions around the way that you're going to assess likelihood. And neither one of these two tables really talks about things like joint probabilities. So there's some questions around things like cascading events, or around things like of lagged events. The examples in British Columbia of wildfires followed by fairly long period of dry conditions followed by flooding rains leading to more debris flows, that's something that we don't have a great handle on. How do we assess the likelihood of that within the PIEVC? And choosing between an absolute or a relative probability, these are things that you need to essentially choose at the beginning of the assessment and work through with a client. The other piece here becomes the events. So choosing the events, sometimes again, like we said, the most extreme events are the ones that we have the least certainty around projections for. So being able to decide upon how you're going to assign a likelihood, or if you will assign a likelihood, is a really important part of the assessment. You can go to the next slide. So I'm going to shift gears a little bit and talk a little bit about the PIEVC kind of digital approach that we've taken as part of a partnership with GIZ and ICLR. So this beginning project was essentially looking for a way of helping users of the PIEVC be able to increase the efficacy and efficiency of the PIEVC application related to any stage of the infrastructure lifecycle. The other side would be, being able to solicit the right types of climate and asset data at the beginning of the assessment and making that information available in a streamlined fashion. Anyone who's been through PIEVC, or if you've been through kind of the data gathering portion of a project, would understand how critical the gathering, collection, understanding, and communication part at the beginning of the project is to have a successful completion at the end of the project. And so the goal of this tool is essentially to provide guided and structured ways to collect, understand, communicate climate data, information requirements, and asset data at the same time. You can go to the next slide. So as a refresher or potentially a new look at PIEVC here, steps 1 and 2 of the PIEVC, the traditional PIEVC, look pretty much like this. So the idea here is that in step 1, you're really doing your scoping. You're understanding the infrastructure that you're going to look at in terms of detail. You're assigning a level of detail for the project. You're trying to understand your climate considerations, your time horizon that you're concerned with into the future. What does the geography look like? Are there any major jurisdictional considerations that'll have an impact on your project? And that all goes into this project definition portion of the work. It looks simple with kind of 5 pieces of the diagram, but really this can take quite a bit of time. And you have to keep iterating on whether you have sufficient data in order to move on to step 2. Step 2 really expands upon that project definition where you start going through more data gathering and sufficiency. So from the climate perspective, you're thinking about your baseline and your future climate change assumptions, your time horizon, in your geography, whether you're operating at a regional or site scale, those sorts of questions. And from an infrastructure perspective, you're trying to decide your level of detail of the infrastructure. Are we going down to component by component level, or are we building this out into kind of more asset groupings or archetypes? So the traditional PIEVC looks like this for steps 1 and steps 2, and would typically be supported by worksheets, Excel sheets, and Word documents. Go to the next slide. Within this online screening tool, we're thinking about the logic flow here, and really we broke this down into kind of multiple steps for online use. So as part of step 1 pre-screening, the goal would be to understand the goals of the assessment. Is this a capacity building exercise? Are we looking at a performance assessment of built infrastructure, or are we building new infrastructure? We also would want to know about the user and the user experience from it, because at this point, there's an opportunity to potentially partner somebody with someone who might have more experience with the tool and being able to help them through the following steps. You can go to the next slide. As part of that pre-screening, this would then feed into understanding kind of the infrastructure and the decision-making context that you have. There's obviously lots of different decision-making contexts that you could have. For this tool at the moment, it's simplified to really having an idea of, are we planning new infrastructure, or are we looking at existing infrastructure? There are obviously multiple stages that you could have under each one of these, But for simplification, at least for this presentation, I'm happy to share more later on if people are curious. Essentially, we've simplified it to these two kind of boxes. You can go to the next slide. And then, and I know it's probably blurred on the screen a little bit here, but there are a few more questions that essentially go into this. If we just kind of stick with one, they're the same on each side, really. Starting kind of from that planning new infrastructure side of things, you go into the idea of, are you assessing kind of a single asset, or are you looking at a portfolio of a series of assets? Are you looking at a network infrastructure, or is it multiple different types of assets? And then we would design essentially this step to be built out to understand for single assets versus kind of a portfolio of assets, a different set of questions. In all cases, then we're looking for more information on geography, which has kind of an interactive map for people to be able to select where they are and what they need to look for. It provides some information on sectors and asset information where we can provide archetypes of typical types of assets for people to look at based on components. And then it moves into the climate portion. And then from the climate portion, we look at things like where are the interactions of climate in infrastructure and make recommendations based upon what we've typically seen in assessments. Climate time horizons, indicators, data sources and data costs, and so on. All of this essentially is built into the logic flow for this tool that we're hoping to finish developing. It goes much more detailed than this, but this was the best I could probably present in this forum. I think that's my last slide. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Norm. I'm going to go to first to the questions that have been coming in through the chat. I'd like to encourage folks to put additional questions in the chat. Any questions around, for example, the notion of a tool like the one that Norm just described, questions around what's happening on the kind of public climate information side of things, its adequacy, challenge with uses, etc. I think we have one question already in the chat, and that came from Nelson Lee. And I think this could go maybe to both sets of presenters. The question here was, in the introduction, ISO standards were mentioned. Which ISO standards are you using and how? And also indicated was, and for how long? Maybe we can go first to the NBI gang.
Yes, thank you very much. I think I will leave this question to our colleague from the other side, because it was in their presentation that I think. Thank you very much.
Okay, sorry if I missed that. Yes, so Norm, maybe you were about to tee that one up for a response.
No problem. Yeah, so all of the risk assessments, including PIEVC, are kind of based out of the ISO 31000 series or risk management standard. But then the newer standards that have come out since the original PIEVC was published are the ISO 14090, 91, 92 series around climate change adaptation, risk assessment, and then community climate change. So we use those standards to help inform the assessment. In fact, when we put together the high-level screening guide, which I believe is one of the following webinars that you'll see, we referenced those standards because they were, they're the newer standards. ISO 31000 has been out, I believe, since the latest version was 2018, and then the 14090 series are kind of 2020 and so on since then. So.
All right, Nelson, I hope that addressed your question adequately. A question from Julianne Pickrell, specifically for Stantec. How soon are you hoping to have the tool ready that you described? Will there be a cost associated with using it?
So good question, and Eric too. I think this is kind of for both of us, but I believe we're kind of in the stages of having this developed. We're working with GIZ to work on developing it. I do not believe that there would be a cost because of the PIEVC suite of products idea, but you know that's out of my hands, I guess. But we are working to get that developed and tested with some of our country partners. So I'm hoping to see that, you know, relatively soon. I don't know if I have an answer on date.
Yeah, and you're correct. It would be an open source app free application for use by anyone is the intent.
Hi, Eric. Can I just jump in and say,
yes,
note
please.
that people can also put up their hands and we can unmute them as well. So feel free to put up your hand if you have a question, and we can certainly unmute you so you can ask it in person as well.
Good, yes, and please don't be shy. So get those questions, please, in the chat. Or put your hand up. In the meantime, I have a follow-up question that I'd like to pose that I think bridges between the two presentations. Norm and Katie kind of operating from the consultant side of things, providing climate services for assessments of many different types, kind of made mention of the fact that the public climate service hubs, kind of data sources, or tailored data sources have their limitations in terms of, for example, the types of parameters that statistics, whether historical or projected, are provided for. And just wondering from both, I guess, the consultant side and the managers of kind of the public site side, like the NBI site, any kind of most important future directions you see for kind of that publicly available information in terms of broadening out or being organized in any other ways to be that much more helpful for the eventual users of that information to really get the mainstreaming of climate change information into assessments and infrastructure projects more ramped up. So any particular challenges or opportunities or desires that you would have kind of going forward for those public facing resources to help with the major upscaling of efforts on the assessment side?
Thank you very much for this excellent question. I think the main challenge.
Is that just?
No, I think we lost
you. Okay, maybe I can try to answer on behalf of Dr. Modathir until he comes. He is here. Yes. Okay, can you repeat, Dr. Modathir?
Okay, thank you. So I will repeat. I think maybe my voice was not clear. So what I would like to say, like this state of art, PIEVC and climate risk assessment, and also the whole process of using like the bias corrected regional climate models and the downscaled and bias corrected GCMs, how to use this information, how like to use the hydrological models to produce like a different kind of information, and how to calculate like the climate risk. So the challenge here at MBI, this concept, it is new, and we are trying to make like a big effort, like to disseminate the knowledge around this important and also state-of-art technique. And also, as we mentioned, specifically in our project, we are mainstreaming the climate proofing through making it clear in our TORs that the consultant must follow the climate proofing guideline of the MBI and should review the climate proofing guideline of MBI. But we are still trying to disseminate this knowledge. But the important part also, because we have our integrated knowledge portal, and it has the details also of these steps. It is well documented, the data, the information, PDF, videos, and these training modules, they are available, but still we need more awareness about the importance of this climate proofing and this PIEVC, and to make it somehow similar to climate, to the environmental impact assessment. What I mean here, the environmental impact assessment, it is well known for any large infrastructure. The environmental impact assessment, it is key for any large infrastructure. So for us here, we are trying to make also this climate risk assessment also a key things. It has to be done also in parallel, with this environmental impact assessment. Sami, maybe you would like to add before we give the floor to our colleagues.
Okay, thank you very much. Just to complement of what you said, also the open source data are becoming more frequent and more reliable than ever. CHIRPS, TRM data, even the DEMs, 10 years ago, we only had 30 meters, now we have 10 meters, and in some specific places, I'm just talking about Nile Basin, we have up to 5 meters DEM data. So as also for the rainfall data. So yeah, of course, it's an issue. We still don't have accurate, especially in the Nile Basin overall. We have scarce data scarcity, you can say, measured data scarcity. So it's always tricky when you want to validate and calibrate our model, and also the climate projection models that we use for climate services. So yes, it's an issue, but it's getting better by the day. So that's how I can phrase it. Thank you.
All right, thank you both very much, and turn the same question to Stantec. We do have a number of other questions now rolling in. Keep those rolling in. Thanks, guys. So Stantec, from the consulting side of things, role of kind of public climate services hubs and their offerings, and how far those might be able to go in the future, what you'd like to see changed or added.
From the perspective here, I think one of the things that's really improved is what's on our portals here and what we can actually use and do within a portal. There are, the challenge becomes the extreme parameters like wind or like extreme precipitation, where we don't have those explicitly shown on any of the portals really. We have methodologies for how to do adjustments. I'm thinking IDF, right? That have been published in CSA, but you have to do some reading to understand those. And it's not really widely available or easy to use for every user. And it's still not really out there for everybody to understand how to use it. There are other types of parameters too, particularly Canada, right? We're impacted by things like permafrost. We're impacted by things like sea ice that do have impacts on infrastructure and have more uncertainty around them. But I think the other side of it is that, how you're going to use it. Are we, I guess from the consulting side of things and working at a design firm, a lot of times we're asked for the single number that represents the future in 2080, which, that's a hard answer for myself or anyone to give, because giving you a single number without giving you some sort of uncertainty estimation is difficult. And I think, you know, it's the fit for use sort of idea of all the portal information. So within PIEVC, it works excellently. Within the design space, it's harder, right? So that, I think that's where the next gap is. I don't know, Katie, if you have anything to add there.
Yes, I think you've touched upon what I was going to say is about the uncertainty, where as climate scientists, we have a good understanding of what the uncertainties are when it comes to the projections, but other users of the data portals may not have that knowledge. And I think additional education and explanation of the uncertainties and why there's an uncertainty and how much probably qualitatively uncertainty is there needs to be added into the data portals for all users to understand.
Thank you both very much. And the notion of capacity building on some of the more technical side of interpretation and specialized uses would be, maybe we'll get to the point of discussing that some, but it's an interesting area to contemplate. But I'd first like to move to a question from Ernesto Rodriguez, which is, what is your opinion about AI, artificial intelligence, as a mechanism to improve the processing of climate data and especially for the infrastructure sector? And either party who wants to take a first stab at a response to that one, please.
I guess we'll take a stab. I'm not necessarily familiar enough with how AI would be used at the moment. However, I would say that we are seeing there's risk analytics firms, right, that are in this space trying to understand that. I do think that AI is probably one of the next big areas for development here, mainly because the question is becoming less about my single site with an asset there. It's becoming more about my portfolio of assets globally. How are they being impacted? Or my portfolio of assets in this region, how are they being impacted? And that's a hard question to answer in the traditional PIEVC sense. You can still use the same framework, but you need to be able to expand it somehow computationally. And I think that's where AI is going to fit in. But I think it needs someone who understands how the framework works now in order for it to, function correctly. I hope that answered something. I don't know if my colleagues have any other answers.
Anything from the NBI side?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. I would like to mention that, we used maybe in the past artificial intelligence, like some kind of method in flood forecasting, but somehow to use maybe the artificial intelligence, maybe in this uncertainty or in the projections. We did not yet somehow use this technique maybe to try to solve some areas or to make some of the process easy. Thank you. Back to you.
Thank you very much. So next question comes from Pablo Borges, and he's asking about how to build a probability scale that's more sensitive or indicates small changes in future likelihoods. Usually, he says, the changes in the probability of a climate hazard in the near future, which is the time horizon for many assessments, are small. And in many cases, the probability scale does not indicate changes in the probability score as a result. So how have you dealt with these things? And perhaps putting that to Stantec.
I'm looking at Katie.
I completely understand where this question is coming from, because it is a challenge when you are interested in, for example, if you're building something that is supposed to last until the 2080s, you want to consider what's going to happen in the long term, not only in the short term. Maybe during the construction period is a very key time frame. So the probability scale isn't necessarily helpful, or maybe not helpful is the right word, but applicable for both situations. Like, I think what's really nice is that we can customize the probability scale. So maybe you use maybe you just focus on the short term to start, and you customize the probability scale to focus on those small changes. So instead of saying, you know, from like annual to 100 years or something like that with your return periods, you start thinking, okay, maybe multiple times per year, and then going out to 5 years or 10 years at the longer return period situation. So I don't know if this is fully answering the question, but I would say that the customization is really a big factor and benefit to the PIEVC probability scaling.
And maybe I'll just add that, you know, one way I've seen it, and it's kind of designed based on client by client that I've seen, where you know, you can almost have parallel scales for what we would call chronic or acute hazards. You can be creative, as Katie was saying, right? So you can kind of design those end points of the scale based upon what types of hazards you're thinking about. I will say there have been assessments where people have asked for earthquake-related hazards, right? And that's not a climate parameter, but similar type of idea in terms of risk, but the return periods are much different, right, than your typical climate events that we're thinking about. So kind of as you're saying, they're not really moving in terms of risk. So it is difficult to have a one-size-fits-all there, and that's kind of the limit of this scale in the risk assessment. But I will say there are creative ways to get around it, I think, as long as you're acknowledging it throughout what you're doing. We've definitely seen that a few times.
Mm-hmm.
Thank
Maybe
you
I
both.
can share also our experience.
Yes, please.
Yes, thank you very much. So for our from our side here, normally we put like a specific maybe threshold, and then we look at a specific projection period, like maybe 2050 or 2080. So the probability here will change, depend on the projected period, and also it will depend on the model. Is it RCP 4.5, RCP 8.5? And it will change also, like depending on the model itself. There are many models, there are main maybe 36 to 37 models, but maybe for RCP 8.5, you can find like more than 81 ensemble members. So calculating the probability itself based on a specific threshold that you determined already. It is based on the experience of the expert on the ground. What is the threshold? And then you calculate the probability based on that. This is how we did this probability. But maybe also at a small scale here, if I understand the question well, if there is like a specific maybe problem, if there is like a land use change, for example, like there is a forest and then it becomes like a bare soil, and what is like the probability, the projected probability. So I think here using a regional climate model, it is also important, like you use the regional climate model maybe with the forest first, you run the projection, you put those GCMs as an input, as a boundary condition. And then you can change maybe the land use inside the regional climate models. And then you made another run. And it can give you like these small changes also. And you can calculate also the probability here, maybe, if I understand the question well. Back to you, thank you.
Thank you very much. And I bet that some of those practical suggestions probably resonate some with Pablo. Based on past interactions, I've had Pablo with you on some of these questions too, but I bet they raise other questions. I'd like to suggest that maybe this is a topic that we could carry forward into the practitioners network to even maybe try to start posting some examples of how these approaches have been done. We're running close to time here. I'd like to take one more, just read out one more question. Another one that has been answered, I think, in the chat, came in from Mohammed Noor. So I think we'll leave that in the chat. But from Chris Chopik, we have, what approach do you use at Stantec to estimate today's overbuild to meet a probable 2.7 degree reality? How is the engineering response for high albedo, living architecture, et cetera, examined for client recommendations?
So it's a really good question. When it comes to specifics around the engineering responses, I kind of have to defer to our buildings folks and our team there, but we do go through essentially the exercise of taking the current design criteria that are either in building codes, either provincially or nationally, depending on what jurisdiction we're looking at, right? And using that core public infrastructure report to really provide climate adjusted design criteria for the key parameters that we're looking at. And that helps our design team understand, you know, if I'm going to design this to last until 2080, what do I need to adjust? And maybe the core systems that we're worried about will be refreshed before then, but it could be a sizing thing. Think about HVAC in a system or something like that, right? So we definitely approach it from the perspective of making sure that designs are going to be resilient to the future. We don't just use, you know, current building codes. We are looking at that report and using the data out of there to understand. Yeah, I think when it comes to the specifics, that's more on the design team than us understanding that, because we can only make the recommendations when it comes to the numbers and hold the meetings with the engineers, but it's up to them to kind of think it forward. So, but yeah, thanks. It's a good question.
Thanks very much, Norm. And I think, guys, we're going to move towards closing this out. Claire, if you could, thank you. Put up the slide. So just quickly to point out that the next webinar, marking your calendars, is for the large portfolio analysis theme. And that's being held on December 15th. And the final thing to say about today, if you could please go to the link that Claire has provided there in the chat to provide some feedback on today's webinar. With that, I'd like to thank everyone for attendance and input and questions, and thank you very much to the NBI and Stantec gangs for the great presentations and Q&A. Very much appreciated. Anything else, Claire, to wrap?
I think that's it. Thank you so much.
Okay, folks. Thank you very much and see you in December. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.